I think that we, young people and older people alike, are under so much pressure in the United States to produce, to be constantly productive,
Yeah,
that there is no understanding of really resting. So, yeah, we have the weekend, but the weekends are like filled with like 1,000 activities. You have to go shopping, you have to get everything done, you have to take your kids to soccer, you have to. So, in a way, and also, Jewish traditions have that, the Shabbat, that like if you actually followed what you're supposed to do on the Shabbat, you're not supposed to do anything.
right.
You're supposed to just rest. You're not supposed to look at your phones. You're not supposed to switch on the light. You're not supposed to. Yes, maybe we're taking it to an extreme, but I think the reason those laws are so extreme is because it's a reminder that all our religious traditions understand that it is important to take care of ourselves and to rest. And then it's true in even non-religious traditions. Audre Lorde said self-care is our self-preservation, and that is an act of political resistance.
Welcome to Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times, where we have honest conversations to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. Hosted by Deborah Owen. Hello, friends. My guest today is Kavita Ramdas, a globally recognized advocate for gender equity, justice, and human rights. Over the course of her remarkable career, she's led and advised some of the world's most influential foundations, including the Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundations, and the Global Fund for Women, where she served as CEO, helping it become the largest public foundation for women's rights in the world. Kavita has worked on the front lines of global philanthropy from India and Nepal to the US and Europe, bringing strategic vision to movements for racial, gender, and climate justice. In 2024, she was named a Richard von Weizsäcker, I hope I said that, fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, where global leaders, influencers, and experts from around the world work together to solve global problems. Don't we need that? And she continues to consult globally through her firm, KNR Sisters. A sought after speaker, teacher, and board leader, Kavita lives in New York City, where she draws daily strength from poetry, activism, and her family. I am honored to welcome her to the podcast today. Kavita, it is great to see you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm delighted to be on this with you.
Thank you. Thank you. As fellow Mount Holyoke College graduates, it's wonderful to be able to connect this way.
As Wendy Wasserstein said, we were uncommon women then, and we are uncommon women now.
We still are, indeed. That's great. Well, we have a lot to talk about. So many questions I have. So let me just dive right in. In your leadership across global movements for women's rights, what have you discovered helps leaders not just endure, but flourish in times of upheaval and loss?
Um, I really think that there is a very important way in which I think we tend to really need to think about leadership in a way that is perhaps also supported with the notion of leading in community. I think there's a way in which, for too long and for too many cultures, the notion of leadership has been defined by a very patriarchal model of leadership, which is that, there's it's the single person on a horse somehow leading the troops kind of a vision. Whereas, in fact, I think the greatest lesson that I've learned from feminist movements and women activists all over the world has been that our strength as leaders actually comes from not being alone. Our strength as leaders actually comes from being in community, from realizing that we're only as strong as the communities within which we live. We're only as successful as the well-being and the success of the communities that we are supporting. And if we are leaders, it is because they have chosen to be followers. And so I think we don't talk enough in leadership about what is so important around those whom we lead in community with. And while I think this model of sort of the leader is kind of a very dominant one, if you live in any women's community, whether it is in a small village in Nepal or in Zimbabwe, or whether it is Mount Holyoke, where you and I were students, we know that actually it is rare for just one person to just be a star. They are able to do what they're doing by being in community. So for me, I think that's the biggest learning that I take away is that there's a lot of discussions about it's lonely at the top, and and my feeling is like, then don't think about this as being at the top. Think about this as being in community. I gave a talk that another fellow Mount Holyoke alum asked me to speak to, the Association of American Universities and Colleges. And I was thinking about the fact that, we do this whole thing about saying, um, the US is first amongst nations in this, this, and this, or Germany is first, or this state is first. And I thought you can only really be first if you're standing in a long linear line. But
Hmm.
if you're in a circle, there's no first and no second, right? Like any one of us at any time could be first or we could be last. And so I think I'm trying to take from the lessons of women in community that we all lead at different times, at different moments. Unlikely people who we don't traditionally think of filling that model of the sort of heroic leader will step up to do something. And you know that, Debbie, because you were, leading a choir. And you know that there are different moments for a choir to work. It can't just be one person
Right.
dominating that choir all the time. Yes, there's a choir leader, but the choir leader, what that person is actually trying to do is to make sure that we all work in community and in harmony.
In
So I'd
harmony.
say
Oh, what
that's
a
my,
wonderful, wonderful
yes,
illustration. And I would also add to that that the choir director is pulling out the best in everybody.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I would love to tap into a couple things that you said. This is so great. First of all, you said that leader at the top is kind of a patriarchal model, which is so intriguing to me. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're right. And then the other piece of it is leading in community. And you also mentioned the followers. There's, hey, can you say a little bit more about how do we lead as followers or as a designated leader, how do we envelop or embrace those followers as well?
I mean, it's interesting. I'm not sort of formally a Christian in any way, but I always think Gandhi used to always quote Christ. And I think if you think about good prophets, they didn't stand on a mountain except, maybe in the Old Testament or whatever. But, really, whether, good prophets lived in community. They lived humbly. They listened to the people who they were serving. And this concept of a servant leader, I think, there has been a lot written about it. And I had a wonderful executive coach some years ago who's now passed away, and she used to talk a lot about servant leadership. I worry that there are all these programs on leadership. There is all there's a lot of like encouragement for young women to become leaders, and I think the notion of servant leadership is the notion I was trying to get to, which is an idea of leading in community, which is that we don't get taught a lot about what it actually takes to be good followers. And
Right.
by that, I mean a good follower is not a sheep, is not somebody who is just blindly following without asking questions, without challenging authority, without asking, well, why are we going in this direction? Because it seems very clear to me that we should be going in this direction. But I
Right.
think the idea that somehow we have to only focus on one side of this equation, which is how to make good leaders, and not think about what does it take to actually understand that if we are in community, that all of us have to learn how to both lead and follow at different times. And so I would love to see more discussion in many of these different spaces where there are sort of leadership programs, for us to also talk about what does it mean to be a community that is supporting a leader, or working together with a leader, or helping a leader define what it is that they are going to take forward. And also to look at the feminist examples that we have of, trying to um, uh, work in different structures. What could the structures of feminist leadership that we've learned about? What is a collaborative? What is a
Okay.
collective?
Okay.
So I think those are things that kind of come to mind when you ask me that question.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you for that. I think that's really important for us to consider. Um, Kind of moving in a slightly different direction, a little more personally, how did you personally anchor yourself during some of your more difficult seasons, say at the Global Fund for Women or the Open Society Foundation?
I mean, I think that's a very, very important comment. And actually, it's not unconnected to the notion of being in community. I think you have to have a group of people who are close to you and who you trust and who you um, feel you can talk things over with. And one thing that I felt was always important was that in a position of being a leader, which you're either put into or you have been elected to or you have been appointed to, um, are there people on your team who are able to talk honestly and truthfully to you without fear of repercussions for themselves. And I think that that has helped me innumerable times in times of crisis. Someone who's come and said to me, the way you handled that staff meeting was maybe not the best. Maybe you could have waited a little longer. Maybe you could have listened a little more patiently to listen to everybody who was expressing their emotions.
Mhm.
Somebody who is able to kind of say to you the things that often it's hard to hear, but that you actually need to hear to learn from your mistakes and to grow from them. And I think you need somebody like that both inside organizations. I was very lucky to have someone like that at the Global Fund for Women, and I was very lucky to have someone like that at home. My partner and longtime companion, my husband, Zulfikar Ahmed. And so having Nikki McIntyre, who was my COO at the Global Fund for Women, um, and other friends who inside the Global Fund for Women who didn't feel that they couldn't come to me and say, hey, I would have done that differently. Or a
Mhm.
board member on my board who would say, eh, you know, maybe the next time try doing it this way.
Uh-huh.
So I think that is very important. Music, Debbie, has always been a place of solace and comfort and just a healing space for me. Whether it's just listening to music, whether it's being able to sing or whistle or just take pleasure in that. I don't feel that I have, since leaving Mount Holyoke, I don't think I've had as much opportunities to sing in community in a sort of formal way, but certainly at the Global Fund, we had lots of singing. In my family, with my two younger sisters, and my mom and my dad, we always had lots of singing. So I think music is, in a way, a space of spiritual comfort and refuge for me.
Mhm.
Um, and over the years, I've tried to incorporate some kind of a meditation practice as well. I'm a very extroverted, people-centered person, but I've come to appreciate that I also value time that is quiet and time that is uh, by myself. And most often, I think my meditative self is soothed by being in nature.
Those are good practices. My next question is probably related to that, and that was that you worked in contexts where injustice and exhaustion often run high. So it sounds like some of those practices are how you helped keep you grounded and hopeful, even when things were really scary or disappointing or frustrating.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. There's a combination of, I mean, I would say that there's a very interesting line between being maintaining a core of calm
Hmm.
while also making sure that there is space for righteous outrage. So what do I mean by that? I think, there have been times in all of these institutions, not so much at the Global Fund, it was often outrage at the circumstances women found themselves in all over the world and being outraged by that. Inside larger institutions, particularly inside philanthropy, there was often outrage at practices and an ethos of an entrenched kind of a patriarchal model, a sort of a white supremacist model that was not spoken about, but that was present, and a sort of a politeness that was like, well, just don't rock the boat, don't rock the boat. And what I would say is that if you are a wager of justice or a wager of peace, then peace is not. I just walked through the Martin Luther King memorial here in Washington, D.C. yesterday. And, he has these beautiful quotes saying, peace is not the absence of war, it is the presence of justice.
Mm.
And so, you know, you could say, well, before the civil rights movement, everything was fine. I mean, there were no riots, there were no dogs on the street, there were no police. It's the civil rights protesters who created all the mess. And that's why we had to bring out the National Guard, and that's why we had to bring out the police. So the notion of absence of justice, I think what I would say is that yes, you have to retain a space of calm inside yourself, but not to speak out in the face of injustice, not to call out things that are blatantly discriminatory and wrong, is to be complicit with those things. Silence in that context is complicity. And so I think, in the context of some of the spaces where I did see things that were wrong, that were unjust, that were hurtful to others or to myself, it was important to also find the courage to speak out. So, I think the travel, as somebody who has been in positions of leadership, has been to understand when and where you exercise that voice, and when and where you wait and you hold your gunpowder until
Yeah.
the next, the next moment where you might be actually more strategically successful. And then when you also realize that sometimes things do not need to be confronted directly, but that doesn't mean that you aren't taking on the injustice. You may just need to address that issue in a different space. That doesn't necessarily mean direct confrontation. And I think that's a lesson that I've had to learn slowly, because I think my instinctive reaction is to just, you know, stand up and be like, but that's not fair, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So Kavita, this is so interesting to me. A couple words that come to me as I listen to you. One is patience, and yet we also know that at some point patience is no longer the right strategy. Another word that, well, you mentioned courageous, which is accurate too. So where's that line between being patient and being courageous? Let's just start there for a moment.
I think that's such a I think that's such an important set of questions, and it's not like we know or have the perfect answers to that question. What I do know is that if you're a person suffering under injustice, you are often told to be patient.
Yeah.
And again, I would quote King on this, and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers. Is like, is 400 years enough patience in
Right.
the context of colonialism in a country that I grew up in, where I'm the first generation of people to be born into an India that was free and independent? How long is patience? Like, oh, you be patient under colonialism in the situation that we're seeing right now in Gaza? Is 78 years of being colonized and being told, well, someday you'll have a state too. But we created a state out of the place you were living in, except you don't have any rights in that state. So I think patience is a complicated place, because when you are telling people who are suffering every day under injustice that all they need to do is to be patient, it can sound very patronizing.
Hollow.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And yet, courage can sometimes be manifested in bearing things patiently. You know, so that's also interesting because courage is, again, as I said at the beginning, courage is not just like leading the troops on a horse and going straight into battle. Sometimes courage is having the forbearance, having the ability to patiently bear certain kinds of what feels like completely intolerable injustice.
Yes.
And I don't know that I have a correct answer about like when is it enough? When does it explode? When does it? And I don't think anybody actually has that answer. I think we all make those judgments for ourselves. We make them in circumstances, as Marx famously said, not of our own choosing, right? But and I think honestly, on that, we just have to kind of go with our conscience. We have to listen to that little voice inside of us. We have to listen to those who are in our community who are saying to us sometimes when we are, it might be an elder in the community saying to us, Kavita, this is probably not the best time. And you're just feeling like, this is absolutely the best time. But again, I would say we don't always know who is right in that. And I would give the example of young people during the time of the 60s and young people just these last 2 years who've been holding encampments on Palestine and challenging universities and challenging the status quo and saying, not in our name, and who said it was a genocide long before the genocide scholars decided that it was a genocide. So it's a hard one, Debbie. It's a really hard one. And I don't know that I have the answers. I just know that sometimes I learn from people who are much older than me and who have been on the planet a long time and seen all kinds of struggles. And sometimes I learn from people who are much, much younger than me and who say, we can smell this and this smells wrong and it is wrong and we are going to rise up and say it's wrong. So
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
I think we really, there is wisdom on both sides of that, of the how old or how young you are. And I think sometimes young people lead because they have this fire and this spirit and this courage of thinking that they're immortal and nothing can, hurt them or harm them. And then sometimes we do need our elders, and sometimes our elders have seen a lot and they have a kind of a patient wisdom that
Mhm.
that does teach us things. So, but wisdom is on both sides. I think you know, being wise is not something that only happens when you get old. I think the young can have a special kind of wisdom because they're closer in some ways to the truth, right? Again, over here, interesting. Didn't Christ say something like that also, right? Suffer the something about the children, right?
He said,
Like,
suffer the little children to come to me and do not
yeah.
tell them to be quiet, essentially.
Yeah, and that there was some way in which I think he had like this, and I try to remind people Christ was 33 years old. He wasn't exactly an old person,
No.
right? So he was kind of this revolutionary, like saying, no, we've been doing this wrong. We have to do this differently. And, I look at young Zoran Mamdani running for mayor in New York City, and I'm like, he's the same age, When
Yeah,
people
that's
say you're
true.
too young, I was 33 when I was appointed head of the Global Fund for Women. So,
Wow. There you go.
so,
Well,
I mean, I
you know,
don't think you have to be old to be wise or
mhm.
to have a perspective on how you address injustice. Sometimes I think it is because you're young and you have a vision of how this world could be different. So,
So this is interesting. One of the questions I wanted to ask you too, and I'll bring it up now because it's related to what we're talking about, is many younger activists feel burned out before they feel empowered. And so, as an activist woman, older like I am, because we were in the same class, what would you say to younger people about how to sustain flourishing over a lifetime of service and resistance? I mean, I'd like to think that we don't have to be
yeah,
resistant forever. We are
yeah,
right now.
yeah,
Someday it will stop, but
yeah. I mean, that is such an interesting and important question. And I think some of it we really have to put on the society within which we live, which is to say that there are huge pressures, particularly, let's speak for a second just about the United States.
Mhm.
Um, in the US, the pressure of a capitalist society, even if you as a person and as an activist and as a committed social justice person, whether you're a social worker or whether you're a doctor or whether you're I mean, really, you can be an activist
Sure.
no matter what your formal job title is, right? I mean, I've met amazing corporate women inside corporate worlds who are trying to greater gender equality in those settings or for greater racial justice in those settings. So I don't think there's only one sphere in which you can be an activist for change.
Excellent. Hi, thank you for letting me interrupt this episode for just a moment. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are you care deeply about leading well, especially in times that feel heavy or uncertain or demanding. One of the convictions behind this podcast is that flourishing leadership doesn't start with strategy. It starts with who you're becoming as a leader, under pressure, in grief or sorrow, in change or transformation. And that's why I've been writing a series of devotional books called The Awaiting for Advent and When Sorrow Speaks for Lent. They're grounded in neuroscience, the personality patterns of the Enneagram, and reflective practice to help you grow in awareness, self-honesty, and presence. And while they do follow the rhythms of the church year, they're really for any season when leadership feels costly. They're resources you can return to whenever you want to lead from the inside out. Not just do more or say more, but become more of who you were created to be, more grounded, more whole. So please see the show notes for links to these resources and share them with your friends. Thanks, and now back to this episode.
But I think that the society that surrounds us, maybe going back to that original thing about what you're expected to be as a leader, somehow I think you internalize those ideas yourself without even knowing that you've internalized them. So you think you have to go it alone. You think you really can't show any weakness. You think you're not allowed to rest. I mean, this is a big thing I have about American culture. You know, I remember being horrified that Americans thought that 2 weeks of vacation was like a perfectly rational amount of vacation to be given. And I was like, here, you have like the covenants come down to you and they're like, rest, 1 day every week, like complete rest. And you've created a capitalist society in which it's in motion. It was interesting to live in Germany last year when I was a Richard Weizsäcker fellow and realize that in Berlin on Sundays, nothing happens. Nothing.
Mm.
Everything is closed. It was so it was so peaceful, Debbie, and
Refreshing.
it was so refreshing. People
Mhm.
just, people are spending time with their families. They are the restaurants are open. That's the only thing. They are sitting outside, they are having a meal, they are being present. We did not see so many people on their phones. That was really interesting. Um, I think that we young people and older people alike are under so much pressure in the United States to produce, to be constantly productive,
Yeah,
that there is no understanding of really resting. So, yeah, we have the weekend, but the weekends are like filled with like 1,000 activities. You have to go shopping, you have to get everything done, you have to take your kids to soccer, you have to. So, in a way, and also, Jewish traditions have that, the Shabbat, that like if you actually followed what you're supposed to do on the Shabbat, you're not supposed to do anything.
right.
You're supposed to just rest. You're not supposed to look at your phones. You're not supposed to switch on the light. You're not supposed to. Yes, maybe we're taking it to an extreme, but I think the reason those laws are so extreme is because it's a reminder that all our religious traditions understand that it is important to take care of ourselves and to rest. And then it's true in even non-religious traditions. Audre Lorde said self-care is our self-preservation, and that is an act of political resistance.
Yes.
Why? Because our struggles are marathons, not sprints. They will not be over in 12.2 seconds or whatever it is, the latest, world record. They will require our whole life of practice. And
Mm.
so I think that we can say that to young people, but we also have to change the enabling environment around them. And I could tell when I moved to an environment like Berlin, where everything else came to a stop on Sundays, then I could more easily unplug myself.
Right, right. It's because that's what the ethos is. And it's very interesting that you bring this up. I love it actually, because for my doctoral project, it's this 10-month journey for ministry leaders to heal and prevent overwhelm, stress, and burnout. And the very first month or two, we are focusing on rest. And I'll add, just to give a little history for anybody who doesn't know, the Ten Commandments, one of the first requirements is the Sabbath. The reason for that, it was God's gift to the Jewish people who had just spent 400 years in slavery where they never got to rest.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so if you put that to today, it's as if we have become slaves within our society, but it's slavery. And
And we've become slaves to kind of some notion of progress or some notion of wealth
yes,
accumulation or some
yes,
notion of capital, basically. Like capital has become our God and our owner and our, yeah.
yes.
And that I think is,
But
so it
it's a
becomes
slavery
very
that
difficult.
we've acceded to.
Of course, we have
It's
acceded to
not
it.
one it's imposed on us by our society. And when we say yes, then
Yes.
that's our problem.
Yes.
So
But the
human
thing is that
well-being
I
is
think it's
different.
also true that it is actually very hard not to accede to it because while we may think that it's not been imposed on us, actually, I would slightly disagree with that. I think it has been imposed on us. It's
Yeah,
imposed
that's
on
what I
us
said.
by everything around us. It's imposed on us by how loans are given out. It's imposed on us by the fact that we don't have in the United States a healthcare system we can rely on unless we're employed. It's
Right.
imposed on us by the fact that culturally people think you're a slacker and a no good person if you're like, well, what do you mean you don't have a job? Not having a job in the US is like tantamount to basically, you remember in the 90s when Bill Clinton referred to welfare queens. And I
Yeah.
was like, these are women raising their children. Do you know what
How
it
hard
takes
that
to
is?
raise a family and how much hard work goes into that? And to
Right.
be dismissive then of care work, for example, the care work that is disproportionately performed by girls and women in our societies is to be dismissive of work that is not monetized inside a capitalist economy, right? So I think it's interesting that when you start unpacking the notion of how do we help young people who feel burnt out, you realize that there's so much in this society that is actually geared against that. And it's not as easy as saying, well, just take your Sunday off and rest, or just find half an hour every day to rest. There is so much that is internalized in our heads about what it means to be productive, how much money you have to make to be able to consider yourself successful in this society, where your children have to go to school, what kinds of shoes they have to have, why they have to have the latest fashions or why you have to have the latest fashion. I mean, there's just 1,000 different ways in which we have internalized what is essentially the message of capitalist society, which is you have to constantly be consuming, you have to constantly be consuming more, and you need more, more, more. You need more stuff, you need more things, you need to live in a bigger house, you have to do your perfectly fine kitchen, which may not look fancy but actually works fine, now needs a redo, a
Yeah.
remodel, better cabinets, better. And I think that that is something that if we want to really support and sustain young people leading in this time, we have to also be caring of the environment within which they're doing this work. It's not easy. It's
It's not
extremely
easy.
hard.
Yeah. And it would take a huge societal shift. And
Yeah.
there are multiple societal shifts that we would love to see right now.
And I think so, therefore, knowing that that's not going to come tomorrow, we
Mhm.
have to create environments in which they can find some space to disconnect, and that's why, again, I would say, so it has to be leadership in community. They will
Right.
have an who are saying, I'm also taking half an hour off in the day, and I'll check in with you and see if you're able to do that. Or let me take your kids for that half an hour so that you can just go and sit by yourself, maybe even just sit in your own house by yourself for half an hour with everything off and just, with the windows open, or whatever it is that you need.
Yeah.
That kind of self-care requires a community of supporters.
So we have to model it and we have to enable it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
And we
beautiful.
have to do it together. We
And
cannot
we
do it. We cannot expect it of people by themselves.
Right, right, right. Oh, Kavita, I have so much that I would love to continue talking, and I know you have a hard stop because of your schedule. Um, Wrap this up for us. If there's one thing, and it could be something you've already said or something that you wanted to say or that's come to mind, if there's something that you really want people to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Um, I think what I would say that I really believe so deeply is that we are all part of one family, and that's the family of sentient beings on this planet. Our mother is Mother Earth. Um, Actually, she's a wonderful model for us to look at in terms of leadership. I think you see the seasons and you realize that she builds in rest. You see how animals take time to just take a nap during the day. Look at your dog or your cat and see how much time that they actually make sure to have to replenish themselves. Um, I think we are very deeply out of touch with nature and the lessons that nature has for us about how to lead, how to follow, and how to be in community, and also about diversity. If we were all supposed to be the same and look the same and speak the same language and follow the same practices, then we would not have the incredibly diverse universe that nature has
And
made
it would be
possible for
boring.
us. It would be terribly boring. We would be eating the same things.
Mm.
So I think the one thing I would like to take away, and I think it's hard sometimes, particularly in America right now, at a moment where it's all about America first, I would remind us about the circle and remind us that the globe herself is a globe and not a square and not a rectangle. And so think in ways that can encourage us to think in a way that we all belong to that planet, we all belong to that round circle of humans, and that there is no first and no last. And to the extent that you are successful at being a leader, you are successful because you stand with all those other people who are surrounding you in that circle and which you are a part of. And one day you might be first, and another day somebody else will be. And that gives me both comfort and a great deal of hope that together we will get through the worst of things.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. How can people reach out to you more and find out more about your work? What's the best way to contact
My website is www.knrsisters.com,
you? Mhm.
and I'm currently working at International Planned Parenthood Federation as a senior advisor. So you can also learn more about what International Planned Parenthood is doing all across the world. Independent family planning associations and reproductive health care clinics at ippf.org.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Debbie, and thank you so much for the work you're doing. And I can't wait to hear the rest of your guests.
Great. Thanks for joining me on Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please like and share this episode and subscribe for more honest, inspiring stories to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. If you have thoughts or questions, or you're interested in finding out about coaching, spiritual direction, or retreat leadership, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out through Substack or find my website at insideoutministries.info. I'm Deborah Owen, and I'll see you next time.